y'all, it's Ilana. Welcome back to my channel. So we are talking about Momtok and their new show on Hulu called The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Very catchy title, right? So I had followed some of Momtok on TikTok before, but I stopped following after the whole swinging sex scandal happened because I just stopped caring at this point. But more things happened after the whole event, so they made a whole TV show about it. So if you don't know what Momtok is, it is a group of Mormon influencers in Utah. They're all moms and they're very young, and they basically created like their own content house, except they don't live together, and they basically do a lot of dances and trends, and they make silly lighthearted videos. And their goal was to empower other Mormon moms and to try to break any like social stigmas and norms within the religion. They tried to be a little bit more progressive, which I think is a good thing, but there was a lot of chaos and drama that came from this. So Momtok was started by Taylor Frankie Paul, and she had her two gals by her side. We had Camille Monday and Miranda McWhorter, and they were the OG girlies. And then it evolved with some other women who are no longer associated with that, but they were the real OGs. And one thing that bothered me about the show is that the women who claim that they're part of the OG Momtok in the show, that annoyed me because they weren't. It was Camille and Miranda. But eventually, Taylor, Miranda, and Camille broke off. They don't talk anymore. There were rumors that they were involved with this scandal, allegedly, where they were swinging with one another and their husbands. But they claim that it's not true. So they parted ways. But a huge focus of the scandal centered around Taylor, where she basically cheated on her husband within the scandal because she stepped out of the agreement. That's where a lot of controversy ensued. And she had posted this live on her TikTok explaining her side of the story and coming clean. And that's where eventually Momtok rebranded and a new group of women came into play. So that's the backstory of Momtok and what you need to know about it. I want to address this video episode by episode with my commentary. I will be giving spoilers, so heads up, if you don't like spoilers, you probably shouldn't watch this video, but if you don't care about the show, you're not going to watch it, then that's fine too. Enjoy. It's always fine to be here for the tea, so you're all caught up to speed, so you don't have to watch the show because I did it for you. So let's get into the first episode. So the episode opens up talking about the soft swinging sex scandal, but I was really disappointed with how they addressed it because it gave us absolutely nothing. We as viewers who had been following this drama wanted to know more about who was involved, what happened during those incidents, and what transpired after that. It was never clear who got involved. There were allegations on who was involved, but it was never confirmed. So I was really disappointed that that portion of the episode gave us absolutely nothing, because I think that's what a lot of viewers were looking forward to the show, is finding out what actually happened, getting the truth, and we got none of that, and I was really disappointed with how it opened up. But this episode does center a lot around Taylor. I mean, the episode is called The First Book of Taylor. Aside from the storyline centering around Taylor, we do meet the women Taylor, Macy, Whitney, Layla, Jesse, Jen, and Demi. So they all have their stories. We hear a little bit of snippet, but some of them are introduced sporadically throughout the episodes and the show. But going back to Taylor, we learn a little bit more about her relationship with her current boyfriend, Dakota. And Taylor has talked a lot about how things haven't been going the best with Dakota. She feels that there are a lot of trust issues with Dakota, that their relationship is kind of toxic. And she had started dating Dakota shortly after her divorce, and they had met through Instagram. And people were saying it's way too soon for you to be dating after this divorce. I know her mom mentions that she does not approve of this relationship. And we actually get to see Taylor sit down with her mom in the show. And her mom is basically talking about how disappointed she is in Taylor and how she has to reiterate that she does not like Dakota. And Taylor throws out, well, I think I may be pregnant. And her mom's like, are you serious? You're pissing me off right now. You're really stupid. And so she storms off. Yeah, it was a really intense conversation. Aside from Taylor and her really bad relationship with Dakota, and keep in mind, I think Dakota sucks, and none of the girls like Dakota either, and we'll talk more about that later. We also meet Whitney. Whitney is brought up. So Whitney fell off the face of the planet and had escaped to Hawaii with her husband and family because she didn't like all the drama that had ensued from the whole scandal. And then she eventually moves back to Provo, Utah. They bought a house together, so we learn a little bit about her story. I didn't like that, again, Whitney claimed that she was the OG member. Well, she was one of the OG members of Momtok because, again, it was really Camille and Miranda, but you know, it is what it is. I'm still really annoyed that the show failed to acknowledge those two in any way, but I do know that they chose to not be a part of the show, so maybe that's why they didn't even slightly mention them or acknowledge them. But I do wish there was something that they could have said regarding those two. Then we meet Michaela. We learned that Michaela got pregnant at 16 years old, and she was dating her husband at the time when he was 21. There was controversy with that relationship and how it seemed very grooming, but apparently in Utah, that's legal, which is weird. There's some weird law around that I learned, which, of course, it's Utah. But she has 3 kids. She's super young. So later in the episode, the girls meet, and Whitney has also talked about how she doesn't like Taylor. She doesn't trust Taylor. She hated how Taylor came out with that live explaining her side of the story. And it leads to like a lot of intense conversations. So Whitney sits all of the women down where she wants to explain something that happened between her and her husband Connor, where Connor was on Tinder. And she wanted to say that these rumors were true. She had initially lied about it, but she came clean. She had mentioned that Connor had struggled with a corn addiction and that he was talking to women, but he never actually met up with them. And that was a very traumatic thing for Whitney. And then, of course, Taylor then brings in her own shit and says, well, I was pregnant. I had an ectopic pregnancy, and I basically miscarried. So that pissed Whitney off, as I can totally understand, because Taylor made shit about herself when Whitney was sharing something really vulnerable and traumatic. But don't get me wrong, I don't like Whitney at all. We're going to learn more about why Whitney sucks. I will say this episode definitely didn't make Taylor look good. It made me like kind of hate Taylor at first, but then I grew to really like her towards the end of the show. And so basically this episode ends with Taylor getting into this huge explosive fight with her boyfriend Dakota. There was a 911 call that was sent in anonymously to the police. They showed up to their house and they arrested Taylor for domestic violence. I'll be honest, I was totally unaware that Taylor got arrested for this. I'm sure like it had been mentioned way before this show came out. In fact, I know it did. But again, I stopped following this after the scandal because I just didn't care about it anymore. So I was totally unaware about that. So this episode does not make Taylor look good. So we see the footage of her crying to the police, and then that's where the episode ends. So now we get to episode 2. We pick up 11 months later after Taylor's arrest. We find out that she gets 3 years of probation and everything that she's charged with. And we also learn that she is now pregnant with Dakota's baby for real this time. So Taylor wants to have a baby shower for Momtok, and there's a lot of drama that centers around this baby shower. And of course it involves Whitney. But some other things that happen in this episode is we meet some more women of the group. We learn a little bit more about Layla and Jen. We learn that Layla got married super young, 19 years old, and then she got divorced. A few years later, she's now 22 and a single mom of 2 kids. And that's gotta be really hard. I think it's so wild that she already has 2 kids at age 22. And then we meet Jen Affleck, who is like the second cousin to Ben Affleck, or I believe her husband is. She's 24, she's got 2 babies, and I will say her husband Zach is awful. We'll learn more about why he's also awful. And I do like Jen. We do also learn that she's more conservative of the group. She's more devout to the faith. and she is a little bit more reserved than some of the other women. So in this episode, before the baby shower stuff starts, the women talk about how their online presence is really important, how they always have to remain brand friendly, especially with their controversial religion. And it was really interesting and kind of refreshing to hear them talk about it and them being honest, saying like, yeah, we care about brands, we care about making money. This gets views, this gets money. And Whitney talked about how she got a $20,000 brand deal with a sex toy company. And she was on the fence about taking it because stuff like that is very taboo. But you will actually be surprised at how sex toys are popular within Christian marriages, because Christians do care about having a spiced up sex life. I swear, Christians become so obsessed with sex once they have waited after marriage. And so I don't see any shame in it, but Whitney talks about the judgment she's worried about facing, especially from her family. Her mom was totally against it, but Whitney's like, you know what, I'm gonna do it anyway. There shouldn't be shame in this. And the talk of sex was shamed back then. She felt like she lacked proper sex ed growing up, which I do appreciate her talking about, because that's just something Mormons typically don't want to bring up. So I can appreciate Whitney for bringing this up. But we need to get back to Taylor and Dakota really quick before we get into the baby shower drama. So there's Macy, and Macy makes it very clear that she does not like Dakota at all. And so Taylor and Macy sit down, and Macy's talking about how she does not like Dakota. She doesn't understand why Taylor is with Dakota in the first place. And we also learned that Dakota doesn't like Taylor's mom and thinks Taylor's mom is kind of petty. And I do think Taylor's mom is kind of petty, and you'll literally find out why. Because it involves the baby shower. So let's get into the baby shower. So Taylor has her baby shower. She invites everyone, and Whitney doesn't show up. Whitney doesn't want to go. She believes she's not friends with Taylor. She thinks that baby showers are meant for close friends and family, and that's why she chooses not to go. So this is where Taylor's mom becomes petty. It takes Taylor's phone, calls Whitney, and asks why Whitney is not there. And yes, Whitney does answer the phone, but that is where the episode ends. So let's get into the next episode, episode 3. In this episode, a few things happen. We meet Jen's husband, Zach, aka the biggest POS ever, and she is celebrating her husband's graduation from BYU and that he's planning on going to medical school, so she wants to throw a grad party at their house. Of course, momtok is invited, and at this party, Whitney and Taylor bring up their drama about why Whitney was not at the baby shower, and Whitney just doesn't want to have this conversation with Taylor at all. It was super awkward, and that's just not the place to do this. And then we have the hot tub scene at this party where they all get in the hot tub, and we meet Jessie and her husband, and Jessie is the more laid back, more progressive Mormon of the group, and she does drink. And so her husband had a flask and they were drinking alcohol, and it makes Jen and Whitney so uncomfortable because they are more religious and they don't drink alcohol. They found it to be uncomfortable, so they made a big deal about that. And then there was another important scene in this episode where Jen was having a baby blessing, and she didn't want to invite certain women of the group. I believe she chose to invite Michaela, Whitney, and Macy because the girls felt like they were the saints and that everyone else was the sinners, and she didn't want to have that there. This episode was called The Book of the Saints and the Sinners, which I thought was a really funny title. So the women who were classified or felt like they were classified as the sinners took that kind of personally because they wanted to be there for Jen. But Jen didn't want that, especially with what transpired at the party. And then the last big thing that happens in this episode is the Galentine's Day party that Demi throws for everyone. And people bring gifts. So Whitney decides to stir some things up with Demi, where there was some sort of like sex joke involving Fruity Pebbles. And so Whitney decides to bring a box of Fruity Pebbles cereal and give it to Demi. And Demi's just kind of like, what the fuck? It pissed her off. And Whitney's joke backfired, and that's basically where this episode ends. It was like such a stupid fight. It really was, but that's episode 3. So now let's talk about episode 4. This episode was a mess. So basically what you need to know is that The girls went on a trip together in Park City, Utah. The biggest thing that was centered at this girls' trip was the truth box. So Demi wanted to do this whole truth box thing, but really I think production told Demi to do this because I don't think Demi just wanted to start up drama on her own. I think this was a production thing. But basically the purposes of the truth box was the girls to anonymously write juicy questions to each other where they needed to come clean and tell truth about stuff so it could clear out any dirty laundry and the air with and any other tension and drama that the girls had so they could just get it out. And let me just say, this totally backfired on Demi. The women ended up being really pissed off at Demi, especially Whitney, towards the end of this episode. So one of the questions that Whitney was asked is why she doesn't like Taylor and if she's jealous of her clout. This made Whitney feel very awkward, but Whitney basically said that she's not jealous of her clout, but she is jealous of the way that everyone forgave Taylor so easily when people didn't forgive her for when she posted this really problematic video of her dancing in the ICU when her son had RSV. It was a very tasteless and disgusting video. Like, why would you ever think that was a good thing to post? Honestly, the backlash that Whitney got from that video was totally valid, and I don't think Whitney took any kind of accountability for that incident, but that is what Whitney said. Jen gets asked if she is too Mormon, and so then Demi decides to answer for her. That causes more drama to ensue. And it's also revealed that Demi has also called Taylor white trash at some point. So a lot of people were picking on Taylor, a lot of people were picking on Whitney, people were picking on Demi. There was just so much messy drama in this episode. My God. I think Whitney was also asked who she least likes out of the group, and then she says Demi because of this whole truth box thing. And then once again, Taylor and Whitney have another side convo about the whole baby shower thing. And then Whitney just basically clears the air saying, like, I don't feel like we are good friends. I feel like this is meant for close friends and family, and we are not that. Once again, she has to bring it up. Oh my God, so messy. And then more fights between Demi and Whitney and the group just start. They're in a circle, like sitting on the floor, just yelling at each other. Demi basically says that Whitney is no longer her friend. And this is basically where the episode ends, with this whole messy fight. My God, this episode was messy. It was so messy. So now we're gonna go to the next episode on what transpired after the trip. So we see in this episode that it starts off with Whitney talking with her mom, just saying how she feels really upset with her friends, and her mom is like, no, Whitney, these girls are not your friends. Personally, I don't think any of these friendships within this group are real. I think they are just simply like co-workers in a way to get clout off each other, as that's kind of what a collective or an influencer group does. But I don't think any of the friendships here are real, in my opinion. But this episode focuses a lot on Layla and her divorce, and the girls want to throw her a divorce party, which I thought was kind of nice. I don't remember why Layla said she got divorced. I don't think she talked more about it, but I did think it was nice that the women wanted to do it. We also discovered that Whitney leaves the group chat during this episode, and Whitney ends up being butthurt because the girls did some sort of paint splatter event and she was upset that she wasn't invited. But it's like, girl, you left the group chat. You can't be upset because you decided to leave the group chat. And then there was also a scene where Taylor does a pregnancy photo shoot with Macy, and Dakota ends up being there. And that pisses Macy off because, again, she hates Dakota. She's like, why is he here? Ugh. But I want to focus on Layla's divorce party for a second. Whitney actually does attend this event, and the girls are shocked. And Whitney decides to pull Jessie aside to talk about what happened. And Jessie just lays it to her straight. I loved how honest and real Jessie is. I do like her a lot. And she just basically gives it to Whitney straight, and she felt like her leaving the group chat was a really passive-aggressive move. So that's basically the divorce party. And then we need to go back to the photo shoot with Taylor and Macy. As I mentioned, Macy does not like Dakota. Taylor has an issue with Dakota being at this event. And then after, I guess, they do the shoot, Taylor and Dakota get into a fight right in front of Macy. It is super awkward and uncomfortable for her. Basically, Taylor feels like her relationship's not secure enough with Dakota. Dakota feels like she's self-sabotaging her relationship. And that's where the episode ends, with this really obnoxious fight that they had. So we get to episode 6. I have lost so many brain cells at this point, but we find out in the beginning that Whitney has unfollowed the women from social media and the girls are annoyed by it, of course. So Jesse decides to throw this paint party and to celebrate her labiaplasty, which I think is just really weird, but go off, sis. I also think this was a production activity. I don't think Jesse actually thought of doing a painting event to paint what their ideal vagina looks like. I don't think she actually thought of that, but it is what it is. There's that weird scene. And then we focus around the girls preparing for their trip to Vegas because the whole Vegas trip was very messy. So this was for Layla's birthday. Taylor surprisingly plans on going even though she's 9 months pregnant. I don't understand it. If I'm 9 months pregnant, I am not going to Vegas. Abso-fucking-lutely not. And then we find out Jen's awful husband, Zach, has an issue with her wanting to go to Vegas. And Zach is very uncomfortable with it. And he doesn't really have a reason to be uncomfortable with it because Jen is very faithful and loyal to her husband. And he is just very narcissistic and controlling. And we learned so much about just Zach's behavior in this episode and how he just treats Jen. And basically, Dakota and Zach decide that they're going to go on this trip because they're both controlling. The girls don't like that, but they make sure that they are not going to stay with them in their Airbnb. So they're already pissed off that these men are going because it's supposed to be a girls' trip. And of course, Whitney does not go. She decides to focus on becoming a homesteader. The episode kind of goes back and forth with this, but honestly, I just feel like Whitney's story in this episode is just not really relevant. It's not exciting. So with Vegas, the girls get there and Macy brings up something that she had received in her DM. So she does something called Sinner Sunday, and that's where people sent in anonymous confessions of sins. And she said she had gotten this DM that someone had accidentally slept with Dakota, and apparently he was with Taylor. She didn't know about it. And so Macy feels the need that she needs to tell Taylor about this because she likes Taylor and she also doesn't like Dakota, and she just feels like Taylor should know about this. Macy thinks it's from some woman named Jenna. We don't really get to know about who Jenna is. The name has been thrown around in the Truth Box episode because in that episode, Taylor was asked if she would leave Dakota if she found out if he slept with Jenna, and she said she would. But we don't know who this Jenna person is, but apparently Jenna is somebody who had some sort of past with Dakota. We really don't know much, but that is who she alleges it out to be. So on the Vegas trip, Jessie wants to plan this Chippendales outing, and she did this VIP package where they can meet the men backstage, rub some oil around them. Jen is not a fan of male strippers. She doesn't want to be here. She already knows that this is something that would make Zach really uncomfortable. She doesn't even want to look at the men. She's looking down like it's so obvious. She doesn't go to the show, and neither does Michaela. And she knows that, like, if she were to go to something like this, it would piss Zach off. And she also didn't want to go to it for herself. But Zach found out that she took this photo with the guys because that was something she was forced to do. Jen did nothing wrong. Like, Jen had no idea this was going to happen until that night. Otherwise, Jen would have been like, no, I'm not going to do this. You have fun without me. And so Zach gets very controlling. He starts calling Jen and starts yelling at her, threatening for divorce and their marriage. And it makes Jen really upset. Jen honestly did nothing wrong because, as I stated, she did not go to the show. She already didn't want to be at the Chippendales backstage thing. And she immediately goes home. So the episode ends with her crying and getting into this fight. So now we'll find out more of what transpired in the Vegas trip in episode 7. So we pick up with Jen still crying on the phone with Zach. Zach's totally overreacting. And I personally think just Zach is an absolute narcissist. He's very controlling. And it's clear that she respects her husband. We also learned in this episode that Zach was gambling until 1:30 in the morning, and he used his med school money and gambled it all away. Fucking idiot. Honestly, who's more in the wrong here? We find this out through Dakota because Dakota and Zach had some sort of conversation. So that pisses Jen off, as it should. But Jen disappears for most of this episode because she wants to try to fix things with Zach. So another event that happens is Dakota shows up at the Airbnb And the girls are like, why are you here? And Dakota's like, I just need to talk to Taylor really quick. He wants to apologize for his behavior because he also didn't like that Taylor was going to this whole Chippendales thing, even though Taylor didn't go to the show. And Taylor's crying and she's like, it's not about that. It's deeper than that. And then a little bit later towards the episode, Macy finally tells Taylor about the confession she received and she doesn't know what to think about it. And towards the end of the episode, Jen finally reappears. She meets up with the women for dinner. She explains that she had some really hard conversations with Zach. She says everything is fine and that they're good. But the women still call out Zach's behavior and that he is kind of like the toxic male stereotype within Mormon culture. And I do appreciate that the women have been calling out problematic things within their church and the misogyny that goes on in it. It is really refreshing to hear stuff like that because, again, I feel like it's just not brought up enough. More women don't speak up about it. So that is a conversation that I do appreciate that they had. And now we'll get into the last episode. So now we are in the last episode. So we see Taylor sitting down with Dakota to talk about the DM that Macy received. And of course, Dakota denies it, says it's not true, and that this whole thing is stupid. Taylor really wants Macy to have a conversation with Dakota so the two of them can kind of squash out their beef. She doesn't like that they don't have a good relationship between the two of them. So Dakota and Macy agree to chat. They do it inside of Macy's car, which I think is really weird. I know Macy mentions, okay, like, this is weird, but okay. They seem to not really get on the same page, and the whole conversation seems to be just really awkward and uncomfortable. But Dakota thinks that Macy is self-sabotaging her relationship with Taylor. I feel like he's really gaslighty. It just seems like he thinks Macy's not good for Taylor. And then later in this episode, we discover that Whitney is pregnant. And the way she goes about announcing this to her family is so disgusting. Basically, she has a cake and she wants to serve it to her family. And so inside the cake, she literally puts the pregnancy test that she peed on in the cake. She still expects the family to eat the cake. And she's like, well, there's a lid on it. I'm sorry, that is just so disgusting. Whitney, baby girl, what are you doing? And then we go to Jen and Zach discussing med school stuff. Zach is really interested in a school in New York City where they may have to potentially move there. Zach thinks Jen will really like it over there. But Jen is really worried about that. She cares about mom talk, as that is a way that it pays the bills, as she is the breadwinner of the family. And Zach's like, yeah, I don't care. And that comes across as very hurtful to Jen. And Jen is really worried if her marriage with Zach is going to even last because she has a feeling that med school is going to be really hard on their relationship and she doesn't know what's going to happen. And then another important event in this episode is Macy's launch party with her brand baby mama. She invites Mom Talk. And we notice that Whitney is not there. And Macy and Whitney actually seem to have a genuine friendship in the group. But guess what? Whitney doesn't go. And the girls decided that if Whitney does not show up, they're going to unfollow her. And guess what? She doesn't. And all the women unfollow her on social media. Then we have Michaela's birthday at a skating rink. And lo and behold, Whitney decides to show up out of nowhere. The girls are shocked and pissed. They're like, what is she doing here? She wanted to bring Michaela a gift. And they basically all tell Whitney that Michaela doesn't like Whitney. Like, why are you here? Go away. So Whitney decides to officially leave Mom Talk. And I think this should be the last episode that we see Whitney in. I don't think there's really any reason or need to show Whitney in season 2. I think it just seems obvious that she is done with the group. She's not posting with the group currently on social media. And there has already been some fights in the comments under her video regarding the episodes that came out because Taylor and Michaela have commented. It's, again, messy. But I just think this needs to be the end of Whitney, and we don't need to see her in the next season. Also, Taylor gives birth to her baby Ever in this episode. And then the episode ends with Macy driving, saying how she's ready to ruin some lives. And so she has Jenna's number for some reason. So she calls Jenna. Jenna answers. Macy says she has some questions and she wants to know if she slept with Dakota, whatever night that was, and Jenna said she's ready to share everything, and that's where season 1 ends, with that cliffhanger. So I don't think anything happened between Dakota and this Jenna girl, because as we still see on social media, Taylor is still posting with Dakota. It looks like they're still together. So either it really didn't happen, or it did happen, and Taylor still decided to stay with him, and everything she said was a lie because she probably just didn't have it in her to actually leave. So those are my 2 theories, but I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts and feelings on this show? I will be honest, I didn't think the show was that great. I felt like the drama was so dry and repetitive. It was the same situations being brought up over and over again, and I wish it gave us a little bit of new stuff. And I mean, it did, but then it get brought up again and again. It just kept snowballing and snowballing, and it was kind of just tiresome at that point. But I will say, I do like that the women who were part of the church did touch on some problematic things that happen within the religion. And I also think that the show was messy overall, and I don't think that it accurately represented the LDS and what it means to be Mormon. Keep in mind, I'm very critical of Mormons, and I think it's a very problematic religion, but I do think that Mormons are valid in the way they feel, because they do feel that their religion is being misrepresented. And I do think that this show does misrepresent Mormonism, because Mormons are typically not very progressive. I do appreciate progressive Mormons. I've met Mormons, and I think Mormons are really nice. Mormons have never done me wrong in any way with the ones that I've encountered. But Mormons have done other people wrong within their families, and people have gotten hurt by this religion. I do think there is criticism on how the religion is portrayed, which I do think is valid. But I'm curious to know if you watched the show down below. Let me know what your thoughts are. And if you liked this video and this overview of the season and my opinions, do make sure you give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!